What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the shop. I'm Brandon with North Texas Woodcraft, and today we've got a commission for a magnetic knife block. Um, Similar to these, but better. Stick around. I hope y'all enjoy it.
Alright guys, we're going to start this with a little bit of post milling. Most of this lumber is from a previous project. It's already been milled flat and square. However, it's been sitting probably a few weeks in the garage, so I wanted to make sure we can mill it, make sure it's flat still. And in part of that process, I like to use the bandsaw a lot to break down the thicker pieces, especially anything 6/4 or 8/4 or larger. It's just a little bit safer, a little faster and easier, and less taxing on the table saw motor. Here we are doing a little more jointing of those edges on that walnut. And if you can't tell by listening, then I definitely need to sharpen these blades on this jointer. It's just a 3-blade straight knife, and when they get dull, they are loud. And here we're just gonna make a mark, try to find the center of this board as best as we can. And I wanted to do something a little different and get a nice book matched look with this walnut. I've got one piece that's going to be a live edge, which is cool and all, but this is a double-sided piece, so I wanted to kind of accent this piece with something special as opposed to just a regular glue up. So we're going to get a nice book match here and resaw this one in half, and hoping for a nice look. And then finally we'll get these smoothed out and flattened on the drum sander and take them back to the jointer. And I like to go ahead and joint the edges again, just to make sure I can get a really good straight glue up. And if you can see in the picture in this clip, it's kind of hard to tell with the lighting in the shop that the glue line pretty much disappears. Once I get it glued, you can see it again, obviously, but this made for a really nice glue line once it was all said and done. That's a pretty good shot, and this turned out to be a pretty nice looking book match. It was pretty consistent across the piece. There wasn't anything real spectacular as far as grain, but it definitely looked nice. And I know somebody's probably going to say, "Why are you gluing both edges?" It's a little overkill, but in the end, I'd rather waste a few drops of glue and ensure that my glue joint is going to be perfect. It's a little overboard on the squeeze out, but it turns out to be a perfect joint, assuming they're both flat. And then I like to put a little piece of packing tape or painter's tape on the undersides of the clamps. Just another one of those little tricks that kind of keeps things a little cleaner, keeps your clamps clean. And then we'll go ahead and scrape off any excess and then we just check for that to be flat and put the other clamps on top. And a lot of times, a lot of people don't do this, but I would strongly recommend you do. Anytime you're gluing up a panel, you definitely want at least a couple clamps on top, clamping in the opposite direction as the bottoms, just to ensure it stays stable and flat. And because if you have the slightest bit of pressure on the bottom too much, it can actually make it cup. That's another little trick I like to use, sanding the same board, just getting some of the sawdust out off of that, and I'll fill it in the glue joint and use some of that glue squeeze out to kind of help make the glue joint disappear. Just one little extra step to take. For the amount of time it takes, it's great. And here we're just going to clean up this live edge. You know, the bark I think would look great on there. I've seen people do it. I don't trust that it would stay on, so I like to clean it up with a grinder. And then we'll go ahead and get a rough sanding done and get some of those marks from the drum sander out. And finally, we'll take it to the table saw sled and get the edges squared up and cut to finished length before we glue up the panel. And speaking of the panel, I actually deleted that footage. This is my second video to film, so obviously a little new. And I've deleted a couple different clips that should have went to this video. And here we're just finding center of this Birdseye maple for the base for the socket, the dovetail socket. And here we're just slowly taking out material for the socket of the maple base. And here we're just going to continue cutting that groove, the dovetail socket out in the base. And again, I like to use the climb cut method just for maybe an inch, just to avoid any of that chip out or tear out at the end of the full cut. And if you guys like these kind of videos, feel free to leave a comment if you'd like to see something different or something I didn't touch on enough in this video. Feel free to leave a comment and I'd be glad to do something different or explain something more that I didn't touch too much on in this. And here we're just going to start getting the dovetail actually cut. And we're just kind of slowly go back and forth, checking and cutting, checking and cutting until I get that perfect fit. And you want it to be kind of snug, but obviously not too tight. You have to remember there's going to be glue in there. So once you get glue on it, if it's too tight and you can't get it in, it's kind of a race to either get the glue off and cut a little bit off, or it's just a headache. It's just best to just take your time on this portion. And I didn't do it on this one, but there's another option to go with a tapered sliding dovetail to where it's tapered off toward the back, so it goes in loose but tightens up as it goes. Alright, so as most of you may know already, this is kind of your more crucial part. You definitely want to sneak up on it on this final cut, especially with depth. So what I've done is went ahead and made a full curve or full cut widthwise to know that the dovetail will fit in the socket. And now I'm just going to go back and slowly creep up on that depth cut. Make sure it's nice and tight. So let's do it. Alright, now we're just going to continue with the climb cut on either side and slowly get this last pass or two to get the final fit. I felt like I need to mention how impressed I was with these bits. This dovetail bit is just a Warrior brand Harbor Freight, really lower end bit. I'm really impressed with the quality, cut quality. I'm not sure how long they'll last, but as of now, they've done quite well for this project. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is my first time with a sliding dovetail joint like this, but that being said, this is definitely what you want to see. You want to have to force it a pretty decent amount, yet at the same time not too much. Still got a little ways to go. Like I said, creep up on it, nice and slow, you'll be fine. I typically get in a rush with things like this, and I always regret it. I'm taking it extra slow. That should be right about it. And here we are with some final sanding right before the epoxy for the magnets. And this live edge is definitely a little tricky to sand with the random orbit sander. So try to take pretty good attention to detail on that portion. We'll go back by hand with some sanding sponges just to make sure there's no swirls, scratch marks. And right about here is where I realized my mistake. Somewhere in between cutting these dados on the router table, I adjusted the router bit for something. And I can't remember what it was, but I adjusted it just enough to where this first groove, the dado, was too shallow. So once I got it covered in epoxy, I realized that once I go to surface it and sand it all down, the epoxy was not, the dado's not deep enough for the epoxy to cover this set of magnets. So the client ended up wanting to go with a different design, so it wasn't really an issue, but kind of a small mistake. Overall, it turned out looking pretty good, but and here you can see there as I finish sand, the top groove shows the magnets through. And here's the finished product. Overall, it turned out pretty good. If you guys like this video, feel free to subscribe and comment down below. Thanks for watching.